For most people, dinosaurs are the almost exclusive reason for playing the Isle and other games in the genre to begin with. Animals that fascinate us ever since we put our eyes on them for the first time. And these titles offer us the possibility to experience a breathtaking ecosystem with others, filled with these ancient creatures in a very immersive manner. When it comes to this young genre, the range of dinosaurs at our disposal is extremely important, not just for our own enjoyment, but also for the game's success. A long time ago I took a deep dive into how rosters are created and the most important parameters that must be prioritized during their creation. However, one particular aspect of it was not discussed through the course of the video, and that aspect is size. We can already see that there's a big trend in generating considerably large rosters for these games. Evrima has currently 13, Beasts of Bermuda 18, excluding playable AIs, and Path of Titans with an impressive 30 prehistoric animals to choose from. And these are only their current rosters. We know that they are actively working on increasing their numbers even further, with Path reaching 38, 25 for Bob, and a whopping 62 for the Isle. The latter specifically is planning on having such a vast number of playables that the size on its own is a problem for the game, an issue that I also discussed on a previous video. Everyone understands that, once again, this is a spectrum. Having either too many or too few is 100% detrimental for the title in question. But in the end, we need to know what we are exactly looking for. What number is the right number? How big should a roster be? The answer to this will depend on a multitude of factors that will obviously differ between games even if they belong to the same genre. We need to take into consideration many mechanical nuances and understand which gameplay elements will be affected by the size of the roster, and that sometimes is a rather tricky endeavor. For example, in the Isle, it is part of their vision promoting herd behavior. The developers want players to form herds or packs and play together, and having too many dinosaur choices is actually detrimental to that. The more numerous the choices we have are, the more spread out will the server be roster-wise, and the more spread it is, the fewer are the players playing the same dinosaur simultaneously, statistically speaking. And if there's only 3 or 4 people playing the same herbivore, it's almost impossible for them to form a group. These are the details I'm talking about. Small aspects that at a first glance seem completely unrelated, that can actually be affected by other components of the game, with the roster being an example of such. So when we are talking about the dinosaur survival genre in specific, how big or small can its roster be exactly? For titles like the Isle, 2 very specific variables are the bare minimum amount of elements that must be prioritized, and those are server size and map size. In truth, all 3 of these are strictly dependent on each other. The map needs to have the correct size for the server population, the same way the population needs to be voluminous enough to accommodate all the character choices the game has available. And the roster needs to have the correct size proportional to the server size, the same way it needs to be small or large enough to take full advantage of the amount of biomes the map possesses. Going in more detail regarding the latter, the more biomes the level contains, the more dinos the roster can hold, because in that case, the map itself gives enough environmental diversity for more different species to be worth existing. Think about it like this. Let's say that we have a singular biome that we can use. With that in mind, having a roster composed of around 5 dinos would be completely feasible, but increasing it to 10 would very quickly become problematic. Why? Because in that instance, there would be an influx of characters in a single environment to such an extent that consequentially, all creatures would be in direct competition with each other for the player's attention, and the end result would be the overuse of certain species that either excel in that particular biome or are simply superior to others in one way or another, and the complete abandonment of the remaining dinos. However, if we had 3 instead of 1, even if the overall map size was the same, it would be possible to have a roster of 10 or even maybe 15, for example. Because now dinos that are adept to one biome have a particular area where they can perform well, and most importantly, without any overlap. And due to that, the roster can be larger without the penalty of some of its members becoming underused as a byproduct of unnecessary competition. Of course that this experiment was very black and white, since this is not how things happen in the actual game, but the concept of it, that is very much applicable. Here's a factual example though for those who are curious. Aquatic biomes are an extreme circumstance of how maps can affect roster size. This particular habitat is so divergent gameplay-wise from the rest of the level that the majority of the terrestrial roster isn't able to even access it, and this opens up the opportunity to expand the character selection by introducing species that wouldn't be added if this biome didn't exist in the first place. Another good and more direct example is Herrerasaurus. This dino has a unique ability to climb trees as well as resting on their branches, and is therefore capable of adapting an arboreal lifestyle. This also provides developers the chance of implementing more dinos with arboreal tendencies, and thus create an entire self-sustaining ecosystem high above ground that wouldn't exist if not for their unique playstyle. So in the end, what number are we looking for the isle specifically once we take all these parameters into account? Get ready, because this is going to be a bit complicated. We know that Evrima has a hyper focus on immersion, including player behavior. Their intention is to promote the creation of a chain of ecosystems across multiple biomes where players can engage with others in unique ways depending where and what they are. For an ecosystem to be self-sustaining, there's a minimal amount of species that must coexist. And in real life, even though there's no specific number that can be established as a minimum, most environments hold at least a dozen. However, this is a video game after all, so we don't need to follow nature to the letter, so let's stick with 5 for now. Using Gateway as the level of choice, we know that map is extremely large and possesses more diverse and well-defined biomes in comparison to Spiro. We have jungles, swamps, open fields, mountains, human structures, namely the biodomes, and eventually ocean as well. But not all of them are exclusive. There's a significant amount of overlap between them. A mid-sized herbivore may be specially adept at living in open fields, but it may also do well in other biomes. Not all of them, of course, but like I said, there is an overlap. We are already used to some sort of categories inside the rosters: land, semi-aquatic, fully aquatic, flyers, etc. If we added 5 per each individual category and biome, the total amount would be around 30 to 35 dinos. And here's when we collide with an issue. The maximum capacity for servers currently is 100 people, 120 if you're lucky, and that won't change for the foreseeable future either. If we divide the maximum amount of people by the size of the roster, we conclude that each species would have 2 to 3 players if the entire server was spread out evenly, which we know it never happens. Having a roster this big would cause 1 out of 2 outcomes. If the majority of characters are well balanced or extremely fun to play with, the population will be so evenly stretched out across the roster that each species will have an extremely small amount of players at one time. You will see a high level of variety of dinos whenever you play, but you will see them in very, very few numbers. Something that would affect carnivores especially, since in most community servers, carnivore mix packing is not allowed. In case the creatures are not balanced though, the better performing dinos would become vastly more popular, while the rest would be not picked at all or in very few instances. A scenario that I already mentioned before. This has the positive of fewer species being present on the map, and therefore it is a lot easier and frequent to find or form herds and packs. But on the other hand, not only there's a big portion of the roster that it's not being used, the dinos that are actually being played may not be a healthy combination for the game. If carnivores are overperforming herbivores, for example, and are the only ones being actually picked by the player base, the end result will be a non-functional ecosystem, since carnies get most of its nutrients from herbivores. It really doesn't matter which side is overpopulated. If there's an imbalance between one category over the other, the biosphere that the game itself is trying to create won't form, or at the very least, not function properly. So for the Isle, its roster should be at maximum 20 species, having enough room for the formation of groups even if the community is evenly spread, while also providing enough variety. Personally, the sweet spot would be 16, but knowing that Evrima is dealing with terrestrial, aerial and aquatic dinos, adding a few more won't hurt the game too much. But more than 20 would certainly affect it to an extent that would be definitely tangible. Which dinos and dino categories should be picked though? That might be the topic for another time. Let me know in the comments below. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for supporting the channel and the content I create. If you wanna join the ranks, you can do so for only $1 a month. The link will be in the description. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and opinions down below. Join our Discord server for memes and pillars and that stuff. And I hope to see you all next week.